Hello and welcome to Down to Earth with Terry Virch, where we talk about what matters down here on planet Earth. Today, I'm super excited to have a special guest, someone that I have not had this genre on the podcast before. It is Tom Sietsema. Tom is the food critic for the Washington Post. And Tom, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining.
I am so glad to be here. Thank you for asking me, Terry.
First of all, the first thing I want to say is you're a food critic for the Washington Post, and in that role, you have to be anonymous. And when you got on the video, I didn't recognize you. Like I didn't know who was there.
That's the entire point, Terry. Yeah. I don't usually look like this, and that's the purpose. When I go out and about, I want to be treated just the same way other diners are treated. I've sort of given up disguises when I go out to restaurants. It takes a little time to do that and make it look real, but I never go to a restaurant under my own name, and I mix those names up, and I have credit cards and other names. It's a little bit of a cat and mouse CIA sort of operation. I spend a lot of time thinking up new names and opening up new Resi and Open Table accounts. It's more work than people think it is, to be anonymous.
I love that. Well, it's important because a visit from the Washington Post food critic is a big deal. I mean, that, like, if you're a restaurant owner, that's meaningful, right?
Well, I always think that everyone should be treated special,
right.
No matter who that person is. And one of the reasons I do things like this is because unlike a book critic or a movie critic, a lot of things can sweeten the pot for a known restaurant critic, right? Like a director can't change the ending of a movie. An author can't tailor the ending of a novel or something like that. But when you walk into a restaurant, you can get the best waiter. You can get the table by the window or overlooking the water. They might be out of certain dishes because the salmon isn't quite good that day, and we don't want to serve you something that's subpar. There are a lot of things that a restaurant can do to make an experience special for people. And I just want to be treated like anyone else walking through the door.
I love that. So before we jump, there's so many food topics that I have. I, like most humans, I'm a fan of food. It's a habit I can't kick.
Yay.
But the story of how we met is pretty interesting. Do you remember that?
Oh, I do. How could I forget? That was the longest trip to Hong Kong, right? Weren't we all going to Hong Kong?
Yeah, my therapist tells me I'll get over that experience at some point. We were on our way to Hong Kong, and we switched planes in Dallas, and we got on the next plane. I won't mention the airline, but the hub was in Dallas, Fort Worth, and and it was like we were on the airplane. We're just about to go. No, you're not going to go. We're just about to go. And it went on for hours and hours, and everybody get off the plane, everybody get back on the plane. And now they need a new crew. And anyway, I think it was a 12-hour delay. It was a nightmare.
Well, we had to stay overnight wherever we stayed at this crummy hotel. That was just like the worst, right? And there was nothing that was open. I remember they had these like boxed sandwiches for us.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
That's where we met you. And we met you at this like dim little bar that was like in this seedy hotel, and we were eating these bad sandwiches. But we really connected, and I thought, my gosh, you were my first astronaut, like it was so awesome.
Well, you were the first food critic I met.
Well, there you go.
That's funny. So there was a group of us there, but like the reason we met is it was so crowded in this pay by the hour hotel that we all had to share a table, like to have our box lunch. So anyway, it was funny. And then we made it to Hong Kong the next day. Thankfully, we made it to Hong Kong. That's the last time I've been. Honestly, I don't think I'm going back because of what's happening in China these days. I have a good friend who's a journalist in China, and she's on trial today. They arrested her for being a spy. It's just awful, what's happening.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
Just around the world that's happening, left and right.
The rise of authoritarianism is bad, but the food was good there. That's for sure.
It was great. Yeah.
So that was kind of the crazy story of how we met. And I'm so thankful as a Washington Post guy. When I was a kid, I grew up in that area. I think you met my parents. We all went out for lunch. You took my kids out one day and showed them how to analyze a restaurant. And I was a Washington Post delivery boy. I got like one of the plaques, delivery boy of the year in 1982. And so I'm a big fan of the Post. I had Craig Whitlock on a few months ago. He wrote
Sure.
Afghanistan Papers. Yeah. So I love the Post, and it's cool to have a Post on. But so your job as food critic, how do you get that? That seems kind of like a dream job. Like a lot of people love food and love talking about food.
Sure. Yeah, it is a dream job. I went to the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown out here in Washington,
Oh, wow.
and
Okay.
I thought I was going to end up in the State Department,
Right.
diplomacy or something like that.
Right.
And I had a couple media internships, one of which was at ABC, another was at the Chicago Sun-Times. And I fell in love with the idea that people get paid to ask people questions, right? You don't go into it for the money, certainly, but
Right.
if you're curious and you work hard, I just fell in love with that aspect of it. And I had a job after I graduated at the Washington Post. I was a copy boy, a copy aide, and those are jobs that involve a lot of grunt work. You answer phones, you do light research, you sort mail, distribute papers. You will do anything to get out of those jobs, right? And these are all college kids, and
So
we
it's like an
aspire.
intern job. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so you apply to whatever jobs open up, right? So one week, the legendary food critic of the Washington Post, Phyllis Richmond, was looking for an assistant, as was Bob Woodward of Watergate fame. And I applied. I had interviews with both of them, and I got a very nice thanks, but no thanks from Bob Woodward. And come on and let's try this out from Phyllis Richmond.
Wow.
And now when I see Bob Woodward, I have to laugh. I'm like, I am so glad you didn't hire me. My life would
Right.
possibly be not as much fun or as adventurous. I wouldn't have traveled as much,
Right.
or eaten as well had you hired me. So thank you, Bob Woodward. What I liked about that job, this was at the sort of beginning of when American food was getting respect.
Mhm.
French chefs were coming over and noticing how good our ingredients were. That the seafood from the Atlantic and the produce from California and Florida. And we were beginning to not look toward Europe as much as we had been in the past, right? So I was sort of there at the dawn of this recognition. And among my jobs as the assistant was to scout restaurants to see if they were worth the Washington Post review. I tested the bulk of the recipes for the food section, so I learned how to cook. I didn't have any formal training or anything, but I would have the same, as a novice, I would have the same questions any reader might about
Right.
ingredients or how to prepare something. So it was great training,
Mhm.
but you can't be someone's assistant for the rest of your life. So I
Right.
began this odyssey where I got, bigger jobs in smaller ponds. And then, I worked on the West Coast. I worked in Milwaukee. I
Oh,
worked for
wow.
Microsoft as a food critic, and I came back in 1998 as a food reporter for the Washington Post. And a year later, Phyllis Richmond retired. I applied for the job. There was no guarantee I was going to get it.
Right.
These jobs do not come open very often. She
Right.
had the job for 23 years. I've had
Right.
it for 22 now.
Right.
And I just feel very lucky. If you can get paid for your passion, I consider that a lucky stroke, right? And I wake up every day, even on my toughest days, I love working for the Washington Post. I love covering food. And the thing about food, you can write about politics, you can write about history, you can write about home cooking, you write about restaurants. And I didn't want the term restaurant critic. I wanted food critic because I thought it was a much broader
Right.
sort of portfolio from which I could write, and it's endless. And, at one time early on, I thought, oh, maybe I can work for Metro and National and get a job overseas as a correspondent. But I've been able to do that in this job. And I just feel really grateful.
That's awesome. So are you journalist? Are you a food guy? Are you a critic? Like what do you consider
I'm
yourself?
a little bit of, I'm certainly a journalist first.
Right.
If I meet people at a cocktail party, I tell them I'm a journalist.
Right.
I wear that hat. I
Right.
should be able to cover a fire or
Right.
look into an investigation just like anyone else, right?
You
But
ever do
food
that?
happens to be my beat.
Right.
I have not had to do that. I've had to
Right.
write appreciations or obituaries for famous food people who have died. Um, I've done, well, a couple of years ago, the Post sent me around the country for a year, and I wrote about the top 10 best food cities in the country. And it was looking at the history and the geography and iconic dishes and where to shop and bars and restaurants. And so every month I would write a Valentine of sorts to a different city. And at the end of the year, I rated them all. And it was this masterclass. I got to travel all over the country. This is after Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, by the way.
Right. Right.
And it was great fun. But I would have dinner with historians and academics and city planners to get a real sense of what the city was beyond just the restaurant scene.
That sounds like amazing. When you do these things, you have a credit card, you have you have an anonymous thing. I mean, obviously you're not having to pay for all these fancy restaurants that you go to.
Yeah. The Post pays for everything. They pay for my guests. They pay, the whole thing.
That's amazing.
Which is great.
Cool. That is.
I'm very lucky. I'm fewer and fewer publications can afford that sort of work. And when I review a restaurant, I also go several times with different groups of people, because a restaurant is very different on a slow Monday than a busy Saturday. I go for lunch. I can go back to see, is the chicken always that dry? Is it always that thick? And you can check for consistency. You get different waiters, you sit in different parts of the restaurant. And I think it's fair to the restaurant too.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a great idea, actually, if you're going to do that. How has it been? You mentioned Bezos. So for those who don't know, for those who don't know, the journalism profession has been just crushed for the last several decades because of social media, and there's a lot of reasons, but people just don't buy newspapers anymore. So how is that now that Bezos owns it? He's pretty hands off, but you don't have to worry about budget anymore. Is that?
Certainly we have to worry about budget. He's a very astute businessman. He expects us to make money, but he gave us money, so we had this long runway to hire a lot of people.
Right.
We have 2 big hubs in London and Seoul, so that when editors and reporters go to sleep here, it's handed off to the West Coast. It goes to Seoul. Seoul gives it to London. So it's seamless. When we have things like wars in Ukraine or earthquakes or disasters, whatever, we can be right there in real time, and you don't have to wake anyone up in Washington, D.C. necessarily to pitch in, which is fabulous. We have a newsroom of about 1,100 people now, and we're growing.
Wow.
Yeah, which is great.
So in terms of like the Mount Rushmore of newspapers, there's obviously the Post, there's obviously the New York Times. Is there anybody else on that list?
Well, I think the Wall Street Journal does a great job.
The Journal,
The LA Times is certainly an important newspaper in this country. I think we're looking, will print still be around in 5 years? Who knows? But we have a lot of subscribers. All those newspapers, with possible exception of the LA Times, have really healthy subscribers.
Right.
Big subscription rates. Yeah, that's great. I think it's really important to support that. And also, just my little piece of the puzzle is so expensive, right?
Yeah.
And you magnify that when we have dozens of correspondents around the world, and we create climate change desks and well-being and all that. It's very expensive to produce the news, and people have to realize there's a price attached to that.
And you have sports, and there's local news,
Metro and the criticism and travel and
opinion. So here's my take on the Washington Post. Like as a former Post delivery guy, here's my critique. It's incredible news. It's great, trustworthy news. I had, like I said, Craig Whitlock was on. I love it that you have such good reporting and you can trust the facts. It leans liberal, and that gets annoying. Like half the articles are just normal, good articles, and then some of them really come with a bias. And if I had a critique, I would say, please lean a little bit less liberal. Or if it's opinion, then I'm a liberal guy and here's my opinion, but that's the only critique I would have of the Post. I love it, and I'm going to keep on subscribing because the journalism is so good. I'm sure everybody knows the Washington Post is not Fox News, right?
Well, we also have people who represent a spectrum of people on staff too, ages, sexes, races, so I think you might be referring to the opinion section.
It depends.
Sure.
Yeah. Usually that normal journalism is good, but every once in a while there was an article yesterday. I don't want to nitpick about it, but I'm a big fan. I support the New York Times and the Washington Post just because I know journalism is expensive and it's so meaningful. Like, we wouldn't have our democracy if it were not for the free press that we have. So it's an important thing to support. And local journalism too is for folks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to know what's going on in our schools, at the courthouses, all of that,
Yeah.
And I think when you lose that, you lose a sense of community too.
Yeah, you do. You lose your community. And then if the local mayor doesn't think that the local newspaper is going to rat him out for doing something, then he might do that thing, right? It's important to have that. It's important to have that accountability. I saw Woodward and Bernstein were on the news last night. They were talking about the phone records that were missing. So those guys, they're still on TV. Yeah. Well, so you do food critiques, but or like restaurant critiques, but you also, I'm sure you talk about just recipes or cooking at home. You don't only do restaurants, right?
Right. I mean, I would say like 10 times a year, I do critics notebooks, and these are, I might take a trend. I wrote, certainly during the pandemic, I was doing lots of reviews of takeout and delivery options, which was really interesting. And I would do themed roundups for that. But I've also written about, let's see, in the last year, I wrote about, the big changes in restaurants, shorter menus, higher prices, less good service in restaurants. So I read about trends.
Why is that? Why less good service?
Well, because a lot of people have had, been able to think about during the pandemic about what they really want to do, how hard they want to work, what industry they really want to be in. And the restaurant industry is a really tough industry. Think about it. Yeah. Servers and cooks are always working when everyone else is playing. Christmas, Easter, Mother's Day, Saturday night.
Right.
Historically, they've had to rely on the front of the house has had to rely on tips. Right. That's this antiquated system of paying people, and it's so fraught with, it really lets the customer drive that car, right? Like, I like you, I don't like you, I'm not going to tip you as much. You looked at me the wrong way. You didn't, it's just fraught with all sorts of problems. And I think we lost a lot of people in the industry, people who just decided to leave. They moved out of the market, whatever market that was, to move in with mom and dad or move in with friends or pursue their own passions. Right. And there's a real reckoning right now in the restaurant industry with people. Like, we need to treat staff better. We can't yell at people. You're already working in a dangerous environment. There's heat and sharp knives, and people can be, I'd like to think that diners were better than they are, but all this stuff that's happening on airplanes, mask, no mask, has played out in restaurants too. Yeah. And waiters and servers are on the front line of sometimes really bad behavior.
It's been a crazy couple of years, man. I think we just need like group therapy. We had the pandemic, which was incredibly awful. We had an insurrection, like we thought the country was going to be lost. Now Russia's invading Ukraine and people are getting iodine tablets in Europe anyway. Like, it's been a crazy couple of years.
Yeah, it really has.
We just need some normalcy. And going out to eat is like one of the fun things of life. It's one of the pleasures that everybody in the developed world can understand and appreciate.
Oh, so, sure. I mean, it's a luxury, that we have here in the United States, I think, right? But I cover restaurants up and down the scale,
Right.
cheap places, luxurious places. I actually have more fun in the mom and pops than anything
Yeah.
else. I've had a lifetime of fancy food, but I really like getting at the stories and talking to people who, about their passions and everything. The interesting thing about, I never stopped reviewing through the pandemic, but I spent a lot, there is such a thing as takeout fatigue too.
Yeah.
I mean, I was getting, 2 or 3 restaurants worth of food every day, and what I found missing from that, Terry, was you don't get the service and you don't get the ambiance. It's
Yeah.
just you, whoever you live with, your own 4 walls,
Right.
and the food that may or may not have traveled well, right? I
Right.
found out, Chinese and Indian and Ethiopian tend to travel quite well.
Right.
French fries and steak, not so much.
Steak frite. Yeah.
Steak frite, yeah, does not
So
travel well.
you just remind me of something. When I was in space, I won't go into the whole story, but one day I heard this bird chirping and I stopped and I talked to my Russian cosmonaut friend, and the Russian psychologist had sent up sounds from Earth. And so he had a jungle, like you could hear birds chirping in a jungle. They sent up waves lapping at the shore. They sent up rain, and we fell in love with these. Were so cool. I still have the MP3 files that they sent. And one of the sounds was a cafe. It was just people talking. You couldn't hear what they were saying. Glasses were clanging. It was people eating at a cafe. That was one of the sounds from Earth.
How cool.
Yeah.
And those were things that we were missing when we were ordering takeout, right? Takeout spiked big time here.
Yeah, of
But I
course.
think you had mentioned earlier too that you had started doing more cooking at home.
Yeah. I want to talk about
that. I did
that
too, just to mix it up, right?
So when you go to critique a restaurant, what's your checklist? I'm an Air Force pilot, right? So we have our checklist. Do you have like 10 things that you remember you told me this when we went out, but can you just talk about what you look for as a restaurant critique?
I sort of let things wash over me, but first impressions don't necessarily start with the first thing that you put in your mouth or the first thing you drink.
Right.
I think they start with a website of a restaurant.
Right.
Is it easy to find the website? Do they list the hours? Do they have the menu? Do they have a current menu, or is it still Valentine's Day specials?
Right.
Do they have the prices? Is there parking information? I think restaurants would do themselves such a favor if they really devoted some resources and energy to good, solid, informative websites, because that's the way a lot of people first experience restaurants now.
Right.
And then, if you have a question, it's always nice if restaurants have a phone and someone on the other end of that phone picking it up, right? A lot of restaurants now, for a variety of reasons, shortage of labor, do not have phones. Or don't answer them. I mean, obviously, a diner should not call a restaurant at 12 noon or 6 o'clock unless it's an emergency. They have to cancel or something, right?
Right.
But I do think restaurants should have like office hours. Like if you have a question about an ingredient, or you want to increase the size of your party or decrease the size of the party, an allergy that the kitchen should know about. You want to be able to talk to somebody, right?
Right.
And I think that's crucial. And then you get there. What is the welcome like? Do people pay attention to you? Are they distracted? Do you feel invited into that space? And then from there, of course, you go to see how fast it is to get water, cocktails. You want your food to come in not all at once. You want a steady, predictable pacing, I guess.
Right.
And don't we all hate it when we are definitely finished with a meal and you can't find the check? You don't get the check, right? So there are all sorts of things that go in, but because every restaurant is different and their themes are all different, I'm harder on some restaurants than I am on others, like more expensive places that have obviously that have proper staffing and have thought about all sorts of details. I think about the comfort of chairs. I think about the lighting. I think about the font on the menu. These are all things that go into a restaurant review. And then the funny thing that the waiter says, or the bad thing that the waiter does, or the good thing that the waiter does, all of these. And then you have to come up with a story week after week after week that
Right.
that sort of makes sense of all those meals that you've had, right?
Right.
And what I do is I tend to go home and type up my notes as soon as I get home. So while it's fresh in my memory, and I have bullet points, and I write down quotes of things that I want to remember, because you forget. I mean,
Right.
I eat 3 meals, and what did I have on Monday night? So it has to be fresh, and then you take those 3 or 4 experiences and sort of come up with like hopefully a fair, balanced, entertaining read.
You do. Your reviews are really great. One of the things that you mentioned when we went out to that restaurant in DC was noise. And for me, that's such a pet peeve. Like, I just hate loud noise, and then you're yelling, and I really hate that. And I was just home in the Chesapeake Bay with my parents a couple weeks ago, and we went in one restaurant and it was so loud you couldn't even hear each other. And another restaurant was completely quiet, and it was really nice. And that's such a interesting thing that is important to me. And I was glad to see that you noticed that.
Yeah, I actually started taking decibel counts about 15 years ago.
Wow.
And I compare them, I give the decibel count, and then, conversation is easy, must speak with raised voice, extremely loud. And I found that there was at least one restaurant that I went to that the noise in that restaurant approximated that of a jet engine at takeoff.
Oh my God.
Right. So you can only imagine, like, oh my God, this is crazy, right?
Yeah.
And that's been sort of a popular thing with readers. They look to find that. As I recall, you and your family and we ate at Momofuku, which was the hot restaurant from New York chef David Chang, and that was pretty loud.
It was.
I mean, there were like 7 of us maybe at the table,
yeah.
And your folks were a little bit older, and
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's something that can really interfere with enjoyment of the restaurant. It's
Mm-hmm.
lighting and chairs and everything else.
Right. It's an interesting thing. Are there any other kind of, I don't know, people would know, like, how fast does a service, does a food taste go? There's normal things that anybody would review, but are there any other kind of unusual things that you look for?
Unusual things. I always think the way someone presents the bill, the bill is kind of like the unfun part of the evening, right? Especially when you're paying for it.
Right.
In my case, the post is always paying for it, but I can imagine what it's like, for other people, and you get that. But recently I was at a Korean restaurant, and it was so cute because the bill came in a little cookie tin, and I opened it up, and the bill was there alongside some spools of thread. And alongside it were some butter cookies. And the chef later explained to me that every Korean kid, or many Korean kids, grow up with their moms. They buy these Christmas cookie tins, they eat the cookies, and then they reuse the tins as sewing kits at home, right?
Wow.
So it would make sense to, so I noticed some of the people who appeared to be Korean nearby, like, laugh when they got this, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, my mom, my grandmother, my father, if he sewed,
that's cool.
Always use these cookie tins as a way of, storage, just being practical.
That's
and
awesome.
I think that I look at things like that. A lot of readers want to know about, I'm very concerned about accessibility for people who are other abled. And so I check out bathrooms, and I check out front doors to make sure that a wheelchair can get in.
Right.
I include that in my reviews. And since the pandemic, I've added pandemic protocols. People really want to know whether the servers are masked, whether they require proof of vaccination at the door. Some restaurants do, some restaurants don't. Obviously, this is a changing thing right now. And I live in DC, which is a little different from Virginia and Maryland. I review restaurants in all 3 jurisdictions.
Right.
And that has become a little flashpoint for a lot of people. A lot of people still don't feel comfortable going in restaurants, but the restaurants here are hopping like it's 2019.
Yeah. I noticed. I was there 2 weeks ago, and it was great. In Texas, we had less COVID here in Texas, I think, than you guys had there. Just the way people treated it. Do you ever go in the back and, like, look in the kitchen? Like, are there roaches crawling around? Is it, if you went in the back, then they would know who you are?
Yeah, and that would be random and not the turf. But I hear, I mean, some of my best tipsters are vendors,
Right.
or and repair people.
Ah,
People who go in and repair refrigerators or
yeah.
walk-in coolers or ovens, or people who go through the back door to drop things off. I mean, I've gotten some good tips from those people. Um, Sometimes compliments like, wow, you should see what they're doing. They're making their own kimchi or whatever.
Right.
Or like, that place is so dirty, I can't believe I would never eat there. The dining room is beautiful and the kitchen is so dirty. I'm not privy to that most of the time, right?
Right.
So you just have to be trusting. And I have to say, I've been doing this for a while now, decades. I've only had food poisoning 3 times in my life.
Mm.
So I feel like I've developed some real immunities, over the years. Like I can kind of eat anything, and it won't hurt me.
I used to, when I was in the Air Force and traveling around the world, I got food poisoning every year. And it was when we were going to Korea and Germany and Turkey. And it just seemed like
Uh,
every year I would get food poisoning somewhere. And I haven't had it since then. It's really weird. That's awful, by the way. I do not recommend getting food poisoning if you can avoid it. We,
no.
yeah, I
At
did.
first, you think you're going to die, and then
Yeah.
you want to die,
You
right?
wish you had died. Yeah. I did an experiment on E. coli actually in space, looking for a vaccine. When I was at the Air Force Academy in the 80s, they had this thing where like thousands of cadets got sick. It was on the front page of the Colorado Springs newspaper. It was on national news. And what had happened, they fed us all in the dining hall, and then we had like chicken salad sandwich. And the night before, the janitor was like hosing down the kitchen, cleaning it up, and he put the hose down the drain till I don't know why, and he pulled it out, and they realized that there was E. coli in the drain of the kitchen, and they pulled the hose out of this E. coli gunk and then hosed down all the celery for the chicken salad. And it literally, there were cots of hundreds of cadets in the hallways of the academic building. And luckily I went in, I got to go in immediately to the hospital. So I was like there with an IV. Oh, it was so bad. So I don't recommend food poisoning if you can avoid
No,
it.
I second that.
So you were telling me about some chef lessons you got during COVID.
Yeah, like I spent a little more time in my kitchen, and uh, because of takeout fatigue, I wanted to sort of. I think it's also good when you're writing about this stuff that you get your hands dirty, that you crack open some cookbooks, and I also review cookbooks on occasion too, so that gives me a chance to cook.
Yeah.
But and there's such satisfaction from making your own stuff too. One thing that surprised me, I am very frugal in the kitchen, as a lot of chefs are. I mean, for cost reason. I mean, for me, it must be my Midwestern sensibility, but chefs have to be frugal. You don't throw away the tops of carrots. You turn it into carrot pesto.
Hmm.
All that bread that goes out to the tables, the unused stuff might turn into bread pudding or croutons or whatever, right? And I found myself doing that at home. It was almost a game. I would open up the refrigerator. I have blue cheese and celery and onions. And I thought, I'm going to use them all up. I'm going to make a salad. And it turned out to be an onion, blue cheese, celery salad that was pretty good. Just 3 ingredients, right? It was sort of like buffalo without the wings, right?
Right.
And I love that sort of challenge. And in talking to chefs too, and seeing sometimes when I've interviewed them out of town or whatever, good chefs do something called mise en place. Mm-hmm. So before they cook, they chop all the herbs and get the butter out and the eggs, or whatever they need for a certain dish. It's called mise en place. It's French, everything in its place. And I started to do that too. And what I would do if I had a little extra time, I would chop an onion or chop some carrots and put them in mason jars and put them in the refrigerator. So on those nights when I felt like cooking, but I didn't want to mess up a lot of pots and pans or whatever, I would look at those things as inspiration. Well, I've already got a chopped onion. I've already got some chopped, carrots. What's
Right.
to stop a hash from happening or something, right?
Right.
And so I thought it was kind of fun drawing on all my conversations with chefs and applying that to my home cooking, and also using everything up. That little bit of gazpacho could substitute as a dressing. I make my own salad dressings. I rarely buy them. A little kimchi is perfect for crunch in a sandwich. You know what I mean? So I can, it's like squeezing out the last of the toothpaste tube, right? I want to use that last few leaves of kimchi or egg or whatever. And I think eggs, by the way, for dinner are like a perfect, like simple, light dinner with a green salad. The French know that. Good French bistros always have an omelet and a green salad on the menu. And I think it's a lovely thing to do for oneself. I mean, it's this chemistry, this magic. You make these eggs, and one of the little tricks that I learned from Dan Barber, a New York chef, was he puts a little bit of sugar in his scrambled eggs, and he finishes it with he cooks them low and slow, so they're very creamy. But he finishes it with a shot of lemon juice, which kind of firms it up and gives it this rounder, fuller flavor that's not tangy, but it just makes for a better, more delicious scrambled egg.
Lemon juice. I never thought of that.
Lemon juice at the very end, right when you're about to serve it, and it doesn't make them soggy. The lemon juice is sort of absorbed into the egg, and it gives it this wonderful rounded flavor that you wouldn't have otherwise.
So we had my kids over the other night during spring break, and we made grilled chicken and vegetables. I probably had 20 skewers of peppers and onion. We just grilled vegetables and chicken. So I had all these leftover vegetables, and my daughter called me that she walks like a mile or 2 miles. She literally walks 30 or 40 minutes to class. She has a long walk at college. She always calls me while she's on this walk, and she's like, just make a frittata. So while I was on the phone, I just put all these eggs in a container, put the vegetables in, because the eggs were expiring. I needed to do something with them. It took me like 5 minutes, and now I have this giant frittata. It was really good.
That's great.
It was exactly what you're saying. Yeah. I'd never made that in my life. I'd never done that in my life.
Well, see, it's kind of like, wow, I can do this. I like that. That was another thing. Another story that I did during the pandemic. I collected a month's worth of all the takeout packaging I had, like every spare fork, straw, bag, and it pretty much covered my backyard. We photographed it for the Post.
Oh my gosh.
And I did a story on food waste and packaging and what we can do to sort of remedy that. And unfortunately, we're stuck with a lot of this stuff. But I really like the idea of restaurants offering reusable tins, that you could send home with people. They could drop it off again, or there would be nearby stations where a number of restaurants worked as a collective.
Right.
And we really need to figure this out too, because we're just inundated with paper and plastic, and
it's such a waste.
It's a bad situation.
They should ask you before. I'm actually working with a guy. We're going to hopefully use graphene in plastic bags and plastic utensils to make them compostable and use less plastic. But they should ask you, like restaurants, a lot of times they just give you a straw, and I don't want a straw. They're just the simple ask would probably reduce it by 10% or something.
But restaurants don't always pay attention to that. You could check it like online, and you could say, no, I don't need any extra utensils.
Right.
And you still get a stack of like 20 napkins and these plastic utensils, because
plastic forks.
On the off chance that someone forgot to ask. But eating that food is so much more enjoyable when you've got like solid knife, fork, spoon, whatever you need. Right.
Whenever I do takeout, I always use my my own knives and forks and stuff like that. So I'm definitely a novice. I never touched anything in the kitchen for decades, but recently I've gotten into cooking. And one of the things I do is HelloFresh. It's one of these delivery services. They send you the food, and there's a recipe, and then you don't have to shop, and there's a recipe, and like planning the meal is so much work and it requires effort, and they take that away. What do you think of things like that? It's gotten me like excited. Like now I cook when I get these things in the mail.
Sure. I hear that first of all, anything that gets people in the kitchen and assembling and cutting and reheating, I'm all in favor of that. Right. I think there's it's time well spent, right? One of the things I've read about a lot of these meal delivery services are not doing quite as well as they were at the height of the pandemic.
Right.
Partly because people are returning to restaurants, partly because of the expense, but also people have learned like, hey, I can do this. I can chop up some carrots and whip up an egg and everything.
Right.
So there is a segment of those people like yourself who now have this confidence to sort of do this on their own.
Right.
Although it sounds like you're not quite there yet. Like
Well,
you still enjoy these.
Sometimes my daughter gets mad at me. She's like, Dad, just do it on your own. And the thing is, that would require me to think in advance. What am I going to eat? To figure out the recipe, which I do occasionally, but it's just easier. They come up with these ideas, and it's not, you actually have to cook it. I mean, you get the raw vegetables and the raw meat and whatever, like you have to cook it. It's the planning is what I'm paying for. Honestly, the planning and the shopping is what I'm paying for more than anything else. And it's about, I don't know how much it is. There's different companies that do it, but I think it's like $60 a week for 3 meals for 2 people. So $20 a meal. It's more than if I went to the grocery store and did it on my own, but it's not like crazy expensive.
Right.
And each meal lasts me a couple days. Like usually it's only supposed to be 2 meals, but I'll probably get 3 out of it. So it's not too bad.
No, that's good. That makes sense.
And it's gotten me cooking. Yeah.
Which I think is, are you enjoying this process?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. It says it always says 5 minutes for prep and 20 minutes for cooking. And it takes me an hour. Like it's a good thing I'm not a chef. I would be dirt poor. I guess I'm just slow, or I guess they're like overly optimistic, but just things like chopping up an onion or whatever, I'm probably not doing it right. Like I said, my daughter yells at me because she took like culinary class in high school for a couple of years. And so she knows what she's doing. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing, but it's fun. And it's gotten me in the kitchen.
Well, again, like I said, whenever you have some free time, it pays to chop up that carrot, the extra onion, or whatever in your refrigerator, or wash the parsley, put it in those mason jars, which you can use again. You know exactly what's in those jars because they're not plastic hiding anything.
Right.
And I think that's a little inspiration for me to use those things up and not throw them away. And
What do you think about kitchen? We talked about this a little bit. Kitchen as a novice. So like everybody's got pots and pans and dishes, those are basic. So your thoughts on those, but there's also all these kind of one of a kind, unique, I don't know, coffee press, or I don't even know what they are. So there's like one of a kind, unique stuff you can get for your kitchen. And then there's the basics. I've gotten in, I don't want to be an advertisement, but like Le Creuset has been the thing that I've got. That's what I've done in my house. It's pretty cool.
That will last your lifetime. And, I like the heft in Le Creuset. I like the colors that they come in. I mean, it looks good, even if you're not cooking, to have an orange or a red or a green Le Creuset Dutch oven on your stove. Just, it's kind of like the equivalent of like a bouquet of flowers or something like that, right? It just looks good. And plus they last a lifetime, which is great, and I use a Le Creuset for all sorts of things other than what it's intended to. I mean, I cook in it, but like I have scrambled eggs in it or whatever. You don't have to have a lot of fancy stuff though. I think the biggest mistake most home cooks make is they think they need something really expensive when in fact, what they should be focused on is a quality, sharp knife or 3, right? The worst thing you can have in the kitchen is a dull knife. It's not going to work as well. It slows you down, and it's just asking for an accident to happen.
It's dangerous, because it can slip off, and
sure.
So the knife is the most important utensil. The big chef's knife. The big chef's knife.
Look, like there are other important things too, but I think if there's any big lesson, it would be to have sharp knives and make sure that they're sharp. Like, get them sharpened or sharpen them yourselves on a regular basis.
Right. That is all right. I'm going to go. I've got the knife.
Also, don't just throw them in the drawer, have racks that keep them upright and keep them sharp, keep their edge. Right.
Yeah. I've got the standard wood thing that's got, I don't know, 10 different knives in it or whatever.
Sure. That works.
Yeah. That is good to know. Let's talk about genres of food and stuff like that. Like, what are your favorites? What first of all, is there any genre of food that you don't like?
No, I think it would be I've known restaurant critics over the years who don't like sushi or whatever. I'm like,
Right.
how do you do this job?
Right.
Or don't eat whole categories of things. I am, for better or for worse, like I'm open to everything, and I will eat everything once, just to try it. I
Right.
think that's important. Um, I think there might be in certain flavors that I'm not really fond of. I had a bad experience with black licorice as a kid. I ate too much of it and got very sick. And so anything that hints of black licorice is something
Right.
that I have to kind of adjust to. So
Right.
things like fennel or anise seed, or, it took me a while to sort of, get into that. But
What's
actually,
that liquor?
I'm
There's a
sorry,
liquor. There's a liquor with that flavor.
Pernod.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, and pastis. Yeah, no.
Pastis.
People,
Yeah. Pastis. Yeah.
yeah,
That was it.
pastis. Um, let's see. So that's really the only thing that I can think of. But my favorite cuisine is probably Indian. I've been lucky to
Oh,
travel to India 2 or 3 times now. It is a large country with a very diverse cuisine range. Some of the best vegetarian food in the world.
mhm.
In the north, it's a little richer and meatier. You have these, rich gravies and everything. But I especially like it in the south. You've got this tropical breeze coming from lemongrass and lime leaves and all that great seafood. It's incredibly varied, and I think I could eat Indian just about every day. Followed closely by Ethiopian, which has a similar profile. And here in Washington, we're very lucky to have a lot of Ethiopian restaurants. I think we have the
Right.
largest community of Ethiopians outside of Addis Ababa.
There's a lot of Ethiopians. Whenever I have an Uber driver, they're either Ethiopian or Afghani.
Yes,
And yeah.
that's interesting that you would raise that point, Terry, because world trouble spots are always good for Washington
Right.
D.C.'s restaurant scene.
Right.
Back in the 70s, we got an influx of great Vietnamese restaurants,
Right.
followed by Iranian restaurants,
Right.
Persian restaurants,
Right.
followed by Salvadoran restaurants. Just wave
Right.
after wave. A lot of these people come to Washington
Yeah.
for different
They have
reasons.
great stories too. Talk to them and ask them, it's amazing. In Boston, there's Haitians, which is the weirdest thing. Like literally every cab driver I've ever had in Boston is Haitian. It's bizarre,
Huh.
but it's
Yeah.
interesting that people go to different places. In Houston actually has the largest Vietnamese population outside of Vietnam. I think I was at a pho restaurant last night.
Yeah.
There's like 400,000 Vietnamese people here. My crew chief at NASA, that the mechanic that worked on my airplane was he was, set in 1979, came over. He was like a doctor, super well-educated guy, and became an aircraft mechanic here, raised his kid. It has an amazing story, just like the American dream story that started in an awful situation that was made better. But
Sure. And Houston, by the way,
yeah.
is one of my favorite food cities because of its international mix there.
Yeah.
You've got iconic local food, obviously, but boy, you've got great Chinese there, great Vietnamese, great Indian. It's one of the largest ports in the world, is it not?
It is. Houston is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, people think of it as NASA, but the medical center, it's the best medical care in the world here. It's a logistics. The port of Houston is massive for logistics. And energy, obviously, it's the energy capital of the world.
Sure.
So there's a couple of really great Indian restaurants that I've eaten at. There's a French restaurant here called Artisans.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible. It is like this incredible French restaurant. This French chef, Jacques Fox, I know him. And it doesn't have a Michelin star. And I want to talk about Michelin stars a little bit. Michelin just doesn't come to Houston. I think. Yeah. So can you discuss that? Like how that works, what it means? 1, 2, 3 stars.
I have gone on record as saying Michelin is fairly new to Washington, D.C. I think they've been in town for less than like 5 years or so, 5, 6 years now. I am not a fan, and you can imagine why. Oh, Michelin competing with the local critic or whatever. It's not so much that. I think Michelin works best in France, where
Michelin.
you're sort of comparing apples to apples. And I
Right.
think when I've used Michelin as a professional eater in Italy or Germany, it all kind of collapses, right? And when they came here, first of all, I'm skeptical of just going in one time, like one person rating a restaurant anonymously versus multiple times and everything. The list that came out in DC was a real head scratcher, and it left off some important non-European cuisines on the list. So I have problems with it. I think one of the reasons it came to Washington is because at the end of the day, it is a business. It's a tire company, right? And they wanted to be closer to the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. And so it made sense. We also happen to have a really interesting food scene here, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's gotten really good in the last 10 years. I mean, I'm very proud of what the chefs here are doing and how creative they've been, and how many terrific restaurants have opened in the last 2 years when it's been extra tough.
DC and Baltimore, I mean, that's where I grew up, and obviously they have serious problems. There's a lot of things that need to change there, but they're really good cities. They're fun. There's a lot of there's a good vibe. I just went and had sushi with my daughter in Baltimore last week. It was like the best sushi I've ever had in my life.
Nice.
Unexpected, but it was really good. And DC is just, it's such a vibrant city. But so the Michelin, what does it mean to a restaurant owner to get a star? Does that add 20% to the revenue? I mean, there's got to be a direct correlation there.
I think everyone gets quite busy after a Michelin star is awarded to a restaurant, and more so, 2 and 3 stars. I mean, I will say that, like, hats off. People do pay attention to Michelin stars. I mean, it's the one sort of, it resonates more than world's 50 best or what an individual critic with one publication might have to say.
Right. It's a brand recognition thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's been around for a long, long time too.
Right.
So it has age in its favor too. But yes, I think they do really well. And especially what I've noticed when I dine out after places have received Michelin awards is you see people from around the world there too.
Yeah. Well, I was in Dubai during COVID, and I think we ate at a restaurant. It was good. I was in Paris with some friends, and there's a restaurant called Le Climat on the left bank. It was a Burgundy from Bourgogne. Just like everything, all the wine was from there, all the food was from there. It was spectacular. I mean, it was so good. And in Paris, it just wasn't that big of a deal. Like I don't even think they were bragging about, yeah, we have a star, but it just wasn't. As my friend from West Texas used to say, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting the Michelin starred restaurant in Paris. And it was spectacular. I mean, the food was so good. So that's my one experience that I've had with that.
Sure. No, I mean, like I said, I think it's best when it's discussing French restaurants in France. I think it has a bit more of a problem when it was in LA for a while. Michelin was, and the scene there is just so diverse. And who's to say that a fabulous taco stand can't be as wonderful as a place that spends $10,000 a month on flowers? That there's something really wonderful about street food or seemingly simple food done really well, right?
And that's where most people are going to eat. Most people are not going to go drop $200 a meal.
No,
that hashtag first world problem, right? That's just not how well, first of all, most humans, of course, on Earth don't eat like that. But even in America or Western Europe, that's just not a normal part of our daily life. So I love it that you focus on that local restaurants. So let's just talk about some. Like you're talking about DC, what a good vibe that is. How about other cities that the Post sends you around the country sometimes to?
Yeah, obviously I haven't been traveling a lot in the last 2 years. I'm looking forward to going to Rome and Florence in June, but I've stuck close to home the last 2 years for obvious reasons.
Right.
What I like about DC is that it's always had good, really cheap food and good, really expensive food, right? but in the last 10 years or so, we have some terrific neighborhood restaurants too that have opened and sort of filled those gaps.
Mhm.
And what's a neighborhood restaurant? I think a neighborhood restaurant is a place that is in a very residential part of town that has is priced so that people can go more than once a month. You could see going there once a week or a couple times a week, depending
Right.
upon your budget, right? And we just have just about everything here. We have first rate, Italian and Indian, lots of Ethiopian, which is sort of a starter cuisine for a lot of college students and everything.
Ethiopian is.
Yeah, Ethiopian. It's
What
kind of
is
a thing you
Ethiopian
do
food
with,
for? What is it for those who don't know?
well, it's sort of based around injera is this wonderful bread. It's sour and tangy. It's flat like a pancake, and it is both the platter on which these different stews and salads are served, but you also eat with injera. So you might get some lentils and some chicken called dorowat with an egg, and other stews. It's sort of a kaleidoscope served atop this napkin pancake-like injera. And then you get scrolls of injera, which you rip off and use your right hand to sort of dip and eat. And I love the sort of communal aspect with that. And I love the fact that this injera is it's so good for you too. The real deal is made with teff, which is a high iron grain that is native, I believe, to Ethiopia, but we now grow here in Idaho too.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's just tangy, wonderful bread, flat bread again, that doubles as a scoop and a dish and everything else. And in Ethiopia, what they do is, if you don't finish your food, you can get it to go, and they fold over the injera over these different stews and salads, and all those stews and salads sort of soak into the bread, and it just becomes this sort of delicious mush.
That's amazing for
the next
lunch
day.
at work the next day. Yeah. That sounds amazing.
It's great. And it's beautiful food. A lot of it's sort of like Baroque cuisine, like a few notes, but that flavor profile is not unlike Indian and really interesting to me. It's got a lot of chili heat and peppery heat and gingery heat. It's very zesty. I think it's good for you. The injera is certainly good for you. I'm a big fan.
I've never really gotten into Indian food. My daughter has recently. Here's a theme to what I'm saying. We went out and we had some spicy food. Oh my God. Like, my mouth was on fire. If you go to an Indian restaurant and eat, there was a scene in, I think, Ted Lasso, where they went out to an Indian restaurant and got some. That's impressive. Like, how did that was impressive. I just have to say that, how hot and spicy that could be.
The trick to that is not to drink water. The trick to tampering down the heat is
fire.
to eat rice or something with yogurt, like a mango lassi would do that, because what water does, it washes those hot oils over your tongue, right?
Huh.
Yeah. So
it's like water on an oven fire. You don't throw water on the stove.
Exactly. But I kind of like that pleasure pain when I'm eating, that stab of fresh ginger or jalapeno heat, right? It just kind of, I don't know, it makes it.
I love spicy salsa. Right? I love jalapenos, but Indian hot that's a different level of hot. That's a different level of hot. You mentioned you're going to Florence. In the 90s, I remember when I was based in Germany, we went down to Italy and we went to Firenze, and I had tagliatelle. It was the best pasta I've ever had in my life. I have no idea what the restaurant was, but I'll never forget the tagliatelle I had in Firenze. It was incredible. So I'm jealous.
Their food very serious in Italy. And one of the great things I like about Italy is that unlike, say, French cuisine, like, there's not a lot you can hide behind. They don't use a lot of sauces necessarily. Right. They're very big on just featuring food at its peak, like they do in California too. The whole California cuisine movement is based on eating things at their best, and not having blueberries in winter, for instance, not
Right.
they would in Italy, but I like that simplicity there. And
Yeah.
there's so much thought and imagination, there's so much thought and skill involved in simplicity too. And I think sometimes people forget that.
Right. My last flight was with an Italian lady, Samantha Cristofretti. She's actually going back to space here in a few weeks. She came to visit. She's here for training sometimes. So I had her over. I made like homemade pasta for her one time. And she was like, man, this is very risky. You're cooking Italian for an Italian person. Anyway, she liked it. But one of the advantages of flying with an Italian is that after you come back to Earth, you get to go to Italy. So we went to and she's from Trento in northern Italy, and it wasn't, several things stood out. First of all, I love the thin crust, true European, super thin crust pizza. That's my favorite kind of pizza,
Mm-hmm.
and they do it the best, and with spicy oil on top of it. I just love that.
Sure.
But the Italian restaurants are not in Italy, are not like they're a lot of times in the States. It's spaghetti and meatballs and chicken parmesan, and with a big thing of garlic bread. It's kind of the standard stuff. And that's not at all what you find in restaurants there. They're just a very different vibe, I found anyway.
Well, I think a lot of it is like portion control too. Like
Yes.
people aren't eating a bowl of spaghetti the size
Right.
of your head.
Right.
And eating over there is, and also when something is really good, like it's not necessarily like you want to eat more of it all the time, but small and easy does it, right? Like a few bites of something wonderful, and then you move on to something else.
In France, especially this Artisan, the French restaurant I was telling you about, that you can buy the menu and you get like, I don't know, 9 courses or something, but each one is just like one bite, or it's a really small thing. And afterwards you're full, but you're not, Americans have a problem sometimes with weight, and I got to lose a few pounds myself. And in Europe, they don't have that. And I think it's because of portion control.
While we're on the subject of travel, one thing that I wanted to bring up is, I'm like, when you're going to space, you can't be necessarily selective about what you get. I mean, you're given this amount of food and snacks and everything.
Yeah.
I think on the road, a lot of people, I mean, now Google helps, but I have this like little list of tips for people who might find themselves abroad or even here in this country, how to find good food on the road. And I think one of the first tips that I can offer is to ask the right question. So many people would stop people on the street or at a hotel and say, what's your best restaurant?
Right.
That's the wrong question. The question you want to ask people is, if you had been away from town for a few years, if they're local, if you've been away from town for a few years, where's the place you'd be most eager to go back? Because if you ask people what the best restaurant is, they're going to assume you want something fancy, and they're going to send you the most expensive place.
Right.
But if you ask people, asking people about where they would want to eat if they'd been away for a while opens up the doors to the best barbecue shop or the best crab place. You know what I mean?
If you ask me that, I would say Rudy's. It's like a gas station here in Houston, only it's a barbecue It's a barbecue restaurant. It's the best barbecue I've ever had. It's so simple. You just I want a half pound of pulled pork or whatever, and they put that's a great question. That's the exact answer I would give. The best restaurant would be the fancy French restaurant, but where would I go first would be Rudy's.
Sure. And then there's a difference between, I would never ask the concierge, because oftentimes, they have a vested interest in sending to X, Y, or Z restaurant. But I have found that antique store owners, bookshop clerks, and wine shops have given me some of the best tips all over the world. Those people tend to know quality and appreciate quality at all different price ranges, right? And also, like, something as simple as the smell test. Just walking into a restaurant and saying, "Oh, could we see your menu if it's not posted outside?"
Right.
Is there real cooking going on? Can you smell onions and garlic in an Italian restaurant? Sometimes I go into chain restaurants, I won't name them, but you go in and it's so antiseptic. It's
Right.
like, wow, are they just reheating things, or,
Right.
or what's going on here? But I think the smell test is really important. And also, does it look clean? Do people look like they're having fun there? Is this a place that I want to spend an hour or so? Long lines are not always a guarantee of quality. I
Right.
have watched people line up behind bad but popular restaurants in Washington, D.C., and I just want to run up to them and say, despite what you saw on that
Right.
TV show of yours,
Right.
this is not the best place to get cupcakes or
Right.
whatever it happens to be, right? Sometimes, but not always. And then I think it's also important when you open up a menu to ask about and hopefully order the one or two things that don't seem like they belong. Recently, I was in a French restaurant and they had Korean dumplings on the menu, and I thought, French onion soup, Korean dumplings,
Right.
veal cheek. Like, what's wrong with this picture? And it turns out that the owner's girlfriend is Korean and she makes these great dumplings, and he wanted to thank her for helping open his restaurant. And so that can unexpectedly be a real delicious surprise
Right.
sometimes by ordering the one thing that looks like it doesn't belong.
Those are amazing tips. And I travel is sometimes anyway. And I'm going to keep those, and I'm going to look for bookstores to ask people. You sparked a question. What for chain restaurants? I always prefer like a local bookstore rather than a chain one, but sometimes you got to do the chain.
Sure.
So like I love In-N-Out Burger. That's my guilty pleasure. I'm a big In-N-Out. Yeah. What are some chain restaurants that you like? In-N-Out Burger. There's one. Are there any good chain restaurants out there?
I think I actually reviewed 10 chain restaurants a couple of years ago.
Oh, okay.
I treated them as seriously as I would an independent restaurant. And my number one, the only place out of 10, the 10 biggest chains, the place I gave an A to, the only place where I actually took leftovers home was from Cracker Barrel.
I love Cracker Barrel. My
Yeah.
stepdad and I, the dumplings are the best.
It's the dumplings. I think they do good. I think it was a pork chop that I had. I mean, this was several years ago,
Yeah.
but the cream gravy tastes like my grandmother made it.
Yeah.
The one bummer is that they don't have wine or beer, but oh well.
That's true.
Yeah.
I don't think my doctor wants me to go there very often.
Right. Nor mine.
With the salt, but I love Cracker Barrel. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Their chicken and dumplings and all their veggies. They have great veggies.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So how about when you're talking about ordering out, food apps have gotten a bad rep, and I think deservedly so, because they take a huge percentage. So can you talk about that process? Like Open Table, or I don't know, what are the food apps that people are using, and is that so? A quick example: I do Cameo. You can go online and you can get a greeting from Terry Virts, and I'll talk for a few minutes, whatever. If people do it on the website, I get a certain amount. If they do it on the iPhone, I get 30% less, because Apple takes 30%, it should be illegal. Hopefully the Supreme Court will cancel that. Anything you do on Apple, they take 30%. It's horrendous. And I'm sure there's a similar thing for restaurants. These apps.
Certain cities have capped the percentage at which, delivery services are able to, charge restaurants.
Right.
What I really applaud is restaurants that have set up their own delivery services.
Mm-hmm.
You can, or takeout. I mean, I choose to look at it that way. And there are actually, at least here in Washington, there's a place called Skip the Line that picks up delivery food. It's like a taxi service for restaurants,
Right.
but they charge you, the consumer, not the restaurant. And especially at a time when restaurants are hurting so much. And historically, restaurants have always worked with very low margins for all sorts of reasons. And Americans in particular have gotten used to eating cheap food. Well, anyone who's been to a restaurant lately knows that is not sustainable, and prices have really gone up.
Right.
But I'm all about promoting independent restaurants that offer their own takeout and delivery service, because it's just keeping the money in their pockets.
Yeah, DoorDash and Uber Eats, they take a huge percentage, and it's not good for the restaurant. So if you can order direct, Same thing. Any on on Cameo, order direct. Don't go through the iPhone because these Apple and Google and these big companies take a lot.
Sure.
Tom, are there any movies like what's a good food movie? By the way, did you see Bad Vegan? Have you seen that?
I have not seen Bad Vegan.
Oh my God.
I'm behind on my movies. I just finished Yellowstone though, where they eat lots of steak. Obviously, it's set in the West. I think a classic good food movie is Babette's Feast when that came out in gosh, the 80s. It's all about a group of people who are very sort of pious and religious, and I forget the general gist, but two sisters make a little money and they decide to serve these rather pious people this life-changing meal, you know, spending their hard-earned money on this meal. And a lot of restaurants at the time were offering Babette's Feast like menus, so you could go watch this movie and then have something similar to that prepared for you in this restaurant.
I love that.
Tempopo, the Japanese movie that came out maybe a decade or so ago, made everyone hungry for sushi and dumplings and all of that.
Right.
I just find in general, I like the role that food has played in a number of movies. I mean, even in Titanic, you know.
Yes, absolutely. Have you seen the Julia Childs movie, Julia or something like that?
Julie and Julia. Yeah,
Julian, yeah.
There are several new series that have come out recently.
Right.
I have, you know, the problem with Julia and Julia, like, I don't know what happened to Julie. You know, she had that 15 minutes of fame. She famously cooked everything out of Julia Child's Mastering the Art of French Cooking years ago. And I'm not so sure Julia was all that flattered by it, you know, like
Julia Child.
Julia Child.
Yeah.
I don't think she was all that flattered by it. She was funny. I got to interview her several times
really
early in my career. And I loved her. She had a great sense of humor. She was serious when she needed to be. Right. She was very self-aware though, and she had impeccable manners. You know, she was one of those people who wasn't so enamored of her fame. You know, right. If we were out eating out to dinner, people would focus directly on her because, oh my God, you know,
it's Julia Childs.
Famous Julia. I mean, even if you're not the least bit of interested in food, you know who she is. I mean, she's been parodied on SNL and all this sort of thing. But she was so gracious and said, "Oh, meet my friend Tom or Susan or something." You know, she was always right. Very welcoming, and she had a body sense of humor. And I was touched. I had to write the appreciation for her, and when I called her longtime assistant, I found out that the last thing that she ate was French onion soup.
How awesome is that?
And I was sort of touched by that, you know, like it was her French onion soup, one of the early recipes, something that she made. And it was her reconnecting with France one last time.
Her book was The Joy of French Cooking, or so it was something like that.
It was her groundbreaking book was Mastering the Art of French Cooking.
Mastering the Art of French Cooking. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's very cool. She, I mean, she's Julia. It's like, oh my God, Meryl Streep. She's kind of like the Meryl Streep of cooking.
Food people. I mean, she never gets old, you know.
Yeah.
And she was also she was always forward thinking. She wanted to surround herself with younger people and younger ideas. She wasn't stuck in the past.
In the 1950s,
Yeah, she had this wonderful relationship with her husband, Paul. And I remember interviewing her in her hotel room at the Waldorf Astoria. And she took a phone call from her husband, who by then was old and frail in a nursing home in Boston. And she came back and she goes, "Tom, are you married?" And I said, "No, I'm not." I was 23 at the time. And she said, "Be awfully careful who you choose. It's an awfully long haul." You know, and so I wrote in my notebook, you know, dating advice from Julia Child. You know,
oh my God, that is amazing.
Yeah, she was a real, there's really no one like her in the business now. Someone who is everyone recognizes, many people respect. She was sort of like the Betty White of the food world,
Yes. Yeah.
How can you not like this person?
Um, I'm just thinking, the Food Network has made a lot of stars out of the next Food Network star. Netflix did a show a couple of years ago that we watched. I forgot it, the Chef's Table or something. It was like every week they did French food, and next week was German food, next week was Korean. They did a different country every week. It was one of those competition shows. By the way, I've got a space food show that I'm trying to get produced. I've got a great idea for how to do a space food TV show. But these have really brought, food to the forefront. It introduced people to a lot of different things like the Food Network or movies. Did you ever see 100-Foot Journey?
I did not. I'm sorry to say.
It is worth watching. It's about I think it's an Indian family that moves to France, and there's like the old stodgy French woman that has the French restaurant, and they're like young and Indian people that are trying to start an Indian. Anyway, it's this competition and they get to be friends in the end. It's a really cool movie, and I think it's in Provence. So it's a great film, a good food film.
Duly noted.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's just fun to talk about those things because that's where a lot of us spend our time on Netflix, or that's how we how we see the world. Well, Tom, thank you so much for coming on. This was amazing. I'm so hungry right now. I gotta wait till lunch. I'm doing this like not trying to eat less thing, but I want to go eat right now. I'm starving.
Less but better. How's that?
That is good advice. Less but better.
Terry, thank you so much for having me on. This has been great fun. You're such a wonderful host, and I love your background there too. I can't wait to see your show.
It's kind of, it's fun doing the podcast with just completely different people from all different walks of life, but this was super interesting. How can people see the works of Tom Sietsema? Just on
I have an author page on the Washington Post. You can just Google Tom Sietsema, Sietsema at washpost.com. I have an author page there with my most recent work, and I'm one of those guys who follows up on his email and everything. I'm at tom.sietsema at washpost.com. I'm also on Twitter, and I try and respond to as many people as I can. And I look forward to doing this again sometime.
Yeah, I'll be back in DC in a couple of weeks. I'm doing a speech in Delaware to visit the parents. So I'll have to look for some of your reviews and find some good restaurants to go to.
That's great.
All right. Thanks, Tom. We'll see you later.
Thank you, Terry.